Photograph with a Canon T5i for the last 3 years, and that did great work. I stepped up to this last year or earlier this year just because it gives me additional capabilities that I didn't have previously. It's a little bit faster of a camera, has a little bit better of a sensor. So I've paired the Canon 80D, which is, like I said, a crop sensor, with a 10 to 18 millimeter wide angle lens. So the crop factor on this camera is 1.6. So that gives me an effective focal length on my lens of 16 to 22 millimeters. So anything wider than 16 millimeters, 35 millimeter equivalent, is going to be too wide typically for real estate photography. You can introduce a lot of distortion and it just looks unrealistic. So this size lens paired with this camera gives you a realistic feel for the space when you look at the photos. And also it's wide enough that you capture the entire space as opposed to a narrow focal length where you may only get a portion of it. You don't get a good idea for the entire space. So that's why I use this camera with this lens, this camera body and this lens. As for the technique that I use to photograph houses, I do HDR photography. Are you familiar with HDR? Okay. So for the video, I'll just talk about it. So HDR photography stands for high dynamic range. And basically that's a technique where you frame your shot and you take multiple exposures of the same scene, and later in post you combine those different exposures. So that gives you flexibility in situations where the lighting may not be the best because it'll expose for different levels of light in each photo. So in most houses for real estate photography, you'll have a dark interior and a bright exterior. So if you did a single exposure, and if you weren't compensating with flash, typically you'll get either really bright windows in a dark room, or windows you can see out of, or sorry, a really bright room and really bright windows where you can't see out of it, or you'll get views where you can see it but the room is really dark. So by shooting multiple exposures, you can expose first for the windows to get good clear window views, and then expose for the interior space and get a good nice bright room. So, and I do that all in post automatically. So as far as settings go, I shoot everything in manual. My ISO, I have it locked in at 400. You could go lower to 100 or 200, but I found that at 400, it doesn't introduce a lot of noise and it gives me a little bit faster shutter speeds. While at 100, you should get a cleaner picture, but it's not really noticeable for the work that we're doing because it's mostly used on MLS where the image is really small anyway. So any noise that may be introduced is negligible. Right. For my aperture, do you know what those things are? Okay. So aperture, I want a very wide field of view, depth of field, excuse me. So I shoot with a depth of field of aperture set to 13. So anything really 8 and above, people typically will use for real estate photography. I wanted to make sure I have clear and crisp photos for the entire depth of field, so I shoot at 13. Anything higher than that ends up resulting in higher shutter speeds, which just takes longer to shoot. And that's why it's important to shoot from a tripod, because sometimes you will get those long shutter speeds, long shutter times, and you don't want to hand hold it because you'll introduce motion blur into your photo. So that's just kind of overview of my shoot style. When I do go to frame a shot for shutter times, I'll meter it for the entire space as opposed to spot metering. So I do evaluative metering because for real estate we want everything to be light, bright. So I want to get an overall idea of what the light is in the room. So I use evaluative and I expose it for a 0 metered. And then when I do my bracketed photos, so I do 5 exposures and they'll range from -4, -2 to 0 to +2 and +4 f-stops. So I get a full 8 stops of dynamic range when I shoot with bracketed photos. So you capture the entire dynamic range when we're photographing. So that's basically the information. This is the camera that I use, a tripod. You really don't need anything more than this for real estate photography if you're just shooting the basics. For exterior photos, I do shoot with a pole, and I'll show you that when we get out there. But basically, it's just a painter's pole with a quick release attached to it. So I just snap my camera on there. I set a timer for 10 seconds. I put the camera in the air. I kind of point it in the direction I want it to be. I can't see it as a blind shot. And then I just take a picture. So that's basically it. Do you have any questions about that?
No. I have a full frame camera.
Okay.
I don't have that wide angle lens though. So
What is your, what kind of lens do you have?
it's a Sigma Art. It's 18 to 50.
So 18 should be acceptable because that's a 35 millimeter equivalent to 18. So I'm shooting a 16, slightly wider, but 18 will get you, you know, pretty much what you need. I like 16 because I know when I'm standing in a corner and I put my tripod down, I can pretty much get corner to corner of the entire space. So 18 will give you just a slightly narrower field of view, but it should be fine for real estate. So, okay. So let's go outside and we'll kind of walk through the space and I'll kind of show you the first steps when taking photos in real estate. You know, so we have the equipment, we went over that, we kind of went over some of the settings, but now we'll go over, you know, when you get to a shoot, what are the next steps and how do you prepare for the actual photo shoot? So typically for homes that are furnished or resale homes, I'll send them a list ahead of time to say, hey, this is the prep list in order to get the home ready for photos. And they'll go through that checklist, but there's inevitably things that are going to be missed. So we'll do an initial walkthrough and kind of hit those things that they may have missed within reason. So if a house is pretty well put together, we can adjust things. But if the house is like a mess, then, you know, I'm not going to go through the trouble because it won't make a difference. Yeah. And so I'll leave the camera in here for now. We'll start on the outside and kind of talk about the things that I look for on the exterior of a property. Okay, so this is a little bit of a unique property because it is a builder property. So it has its own unique set of challenges. For real estate photography, you can't have any agent branding or builder branding in the photos. So we need to remove any signage that they may have and place it out of sight. Sometimes there's construction material that's left out, and you know, within reason we can move some of those things. Like on the back porch, there's a paint can. Okay. We'll move that as well. So sometimes they'll have job site boxes. Typically, those are they're pretty heavy. They're put in with like a 4x4 post. Okay. So that might be a challenge to move, but I usually can get them out without too much trouble. Okay, so for the exterior, you know, we're just looking to make sure things are tidied up. If they had a flag, we'll make sure that it's unfurled so it flies freely. If it's a super windy day, then I'll remove the flag because it'll be moving within the photo, which will cause it to become blurry, which is not something we want. So, you know, if they've got team flags that they like, sometimes it's controversial for buyers, I don't know why, but we'll remove those too. Okay. If there were cars in the driveway, we'd have them move those out before photographing. Okay. Okay. So we'll just work our way through the property. So when we prep the house, basically my spiel is, you know, we'll walk through the home. We're going to turn on every single light, including lamps if you have lamps. If any of the ceiling fans are operating are on, we'll turn those off. Then we'll go through room by room. We'll look at each room to see if there's anything out of place, and we'll either put it away, straighten it up, or just rearrange it as needed. As for blinds, typically I have blinds open, so not raised up, but just if they're horizontal, just slats open. And that may change depending on where the sun is. If the sun is low in the sky and you're getting a lot of light streaming through, I will tilt the blinds upward to get the light diffuse through the space, but not have direct light into the room. So we're starting in the foyer. Obviously there's no furniture in here, so we're just gonna kind of quickly walk through, turn on all the lights. You know, I'm gonna adjust the towel bars, so we want them, you know, kind of hanging straight down. I don't want them sticking out, just so it looks natural. Any toilet seats, you want to make sure those are all put down. Okay. And we'll shut the doors for bathrooms in living spaces. So I'll photograph the space with those doors shut. Don't typically photograph closets unless it's like the master bedroom and it's a walk-in closet. Any like standing closets, I won't photograph those.
Okay.
Usually they're full of stuff anyway. So, okay, so as we walk through, we'll want to make sure that all the fixtures are centered, all the handles are pointed upward, that all lights are turned on, including these types. So this stove is obviously pushed out. If it's not too difficult, you can push it back in place. You just got to be very careful when moving appliances because you don't want to damage it. Always look for under cabinet lights. This one does have them and they're already on, so that's great. So now we're in the living room, looking around. There's obviously not much going on, so we'll just turn all the lights on here. And I'm assuming these are exterior lights, which they don't have any, so we're not going to worry about that. I don't know, we'll see. Yeah, so this must be from over there. Okay. So on the back porch, like I said, I was out here earlier, so I did notice there's a 5-gallon paint can. So I'll bring that in, probably just place it in the garage. Little things like this, you just pick that up. Okay, so I think first floor looks good. This has actually a 3-story plan. So let's make our way up. And we're just going to continue doing what we were doing. Like I said, turning lights on if you want to grab the hallway lights here. So I've actually shot this floor plan a couple of times already, so I already know what photos I'm going to be taking. But normally, if it's a plan I've never seen, I'll kind of look around and kind of evaluate, okay, what kind of angles do I want to take for the property. I have a standard shot list, so I'll kind of tell you what those are as we're walking through. So as for closets, this is the master bedroom, so it has a walk-in closet. The one thing to note when there is a window in the closet, sometimes the door opens in front of the window, which is fine for the interior, but for exterior shots, you want to close the door so you have a clear view from the window. You don't want a big bulky door in your window shot. Okay, so there's a couple more bedrooms here and a bathroom. So we'll just turn those lights on and okay. There's no fixtures in here. So just check to make sure that the closet doors are shut all the way. I'll do the same in this room. Okay, everything looks good here, so it's easier just to go through the entire space at once. That way when you go to photograph, you're not having to, you can concentrate on framing the shot and taking the picture. So in here, again, we just put the toilet seat down. It's a big open space, so just make sure the doors are shut. So in this case, I'm going to have the bathroom door open because this is kind of like a bedroom space. I think you could use it as a, another living space, but we'll use it like as a bedroom since it's a shower. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to know that there's a bathroom off of the space. So, okay, we've gone through the entire house. So now we can kind of start our photo shoot. So for photos, I'll start outside. And circumstances always, if there's people in the house and then you need to just start inside because the baby's got to take a nap, you need to be a little bit flexible. But if I have my choice, I typically photograph the property the same way that I would walk through the space. So I'll start from the outside. So I'll start from the outside and then photograph the inside. And then from here I could either go from the living room to the exterior, or I just usually wait to the end to the exterior, because that way I'm not tracking in a bunch of dirt in case I walk through something back there and have to come back inside. So let's go back outside. Like I said, for exterior photos, I typically shoot anything that's higher than a single story with a pole. But for this purposes, I'll show you with the camera on a tripod and then also with a pole, just so you can kind of see the differences. All right. So for exterior shots, you want to have your, oh, sorry, I can shut the door. You want to have your camera as high as possible, because you do not want your camera pointing upward. When your camera is pointed upward, it introduces a lot of your vertical geometric distortion, because when you go later, we'll correct these in post. So whenever you tilt your camera upwards, what happens is it causes your vertical lines of the house to skew upward. And in post, we correct those to make them vertical again. So the less amount of correction that you do, the better, because it gives a better representation. So if I'm outside, if I'm shooting with my tripod, I'm going to set it up so it's as high as possible. The easier thing for me to do is actually use the pole, because I can set my camera at the same height as the middle of the house. But like I said, for intents and purposes, we'll shoot it from a tripod. For exterior shots, I'll typically take 3 photos. It's a little bit different with a townhouse because there's an adjacent property, but we'll go ahead and take 3 anyway. Okay, so I'll get my camera set up, adjust all the settings to where we talked about, where I'm taking, 5 bracketed exposures, set from -4 to +4 stops. I'm looking at my grid lines here. I have it framed up. So for shots where you're straight on the building, you want to have your verticals and your horizontals, vertical and horizontal. Obviously, like I said, we're shooting upwards, so our verticals are not going to be vertical, but we can get our horizontals horizontal. So when I'm looking at my photo, I'm looking at my grid lines, and I'm looking at this middle grid line to make sure it's like everything is straight. And then the same thing at the bottom here, when I'm looking at these garages, like everything is straight. It's not skewed left or right. Okay. As far as focusing, so I'm looking at my meter down here, and I want that to be metered at 0. And then once I'm happy with the way I framed the photo, then you just hit the shutter. I have mine on touch screen, so just touch it. When you focus your shot, you want to have your focal point kind of in the middle of the field, the depth of field. So in here, it's kind of the house is what it is. That's all in the same plane. So you want to photograph it there. If we had like a room, and I'll go over that over there, you may want to focus on something in the middle of the room. So anyway, that'll be our first shot, and then I'll move to the sides to get those side shots. So again, for the side shots, the horizontals aren't going to be horizontal because there's no horizontal line. For verticals, the only vertical line I'm really concerned about is the center line, because then that would, and I want my camera to kind of be perfectly up and down vertical, so that the amount of lens, the amount of distortion is equal on both the left and right side of the photo. Because if you skew it and your right side has got a vertical line, but the left side is like way skewed, then you're going to have a lot of overcorrection on the left without correction on the right, and it looks even weirder. So this middle line is what I'm looking at. I want that perfectly vertical. And again, I've checked my f-stop here, my exposure, and we're right on. I'll just hit the shutter button there. And you can hear it clicked 5 times because we're taking 5 photos. It's pretty bright, so it's pretty fast. But inside, there may be areas where it's darker and you'll have longer shutter times. Okay, so for this shot, we'll have to remove that sign over there. because it has their branding. So, okay. And I may have to take that first shot again also, because it might have had it, it might probably have showed up in the first shot. All right, so again, I'm just doing the exact same thing. I'm looking at that center line, making sure it's vertical. Checking my exposure, and then just taking the picture. I don't know, I think it was okay. Okay, so let's assume that was good. Okay, so like I said, normally I do shoot, oh, leave that there first, because I'm going to shoot it with a pole. So that was just for purposes of if you're not shooting with a pole. So for now, I'm just going to lower this tripod. I'm going to grab my pole and kind of show you what that looks like. So I'll let you know the pole thing is a little bit more tricky because it's a little bit intimidating, putting like $1,000 on the end of a stick. Okay, so for the pole, it's just a painter's pole. It's telescoping. You can get up to 16 feet if you want to, or you can even get a little bit higher if you want to raise the pole up. So the way I shot the first photos is I had it on a 2-second timer, 2-second delay, so that when I touch the camera, it moves the camera a little bit. I want all that to settle out. So 2 seconds is sufficient. This, I don't have the luxury of that. I have it set to a 10-second timer. So what I do is I extend the pole, to about here for for 2-story property. I'll focus the camera here. I'll set my exposure and everything while I'm on the ground. As far as your zoom, you kind of have from experience, we'll be able to tell how far to zoom in and out to make sure you capture the entire subject in the frame. It's always easier to go wide than it is to go narrow, because we are using it for web purposes. So if you crop off some of it, it's not that big of a deal. There's still plenty of pixels left. Okay, so this is what it looks like. It's kind of you want to do it in one fluid motion, so it's just nice and fluid, and that'll just take some practice. So I'm looking at it, and I want to make sure that the pole is straight as possible. I'm trying to, again, get my verticals and horizontals straight. I want to keep the pole as still as possible when it's actually taking the photos. In post, there is the software can adjust for some movement, so it doesn't have to be completely static. Ideally, it is though. So this can be challenging. Like today is not too windy, but sometimes, especially at the beach, and those are always elevated homes, it can be very difficult to get a good shot. Okay, so for this one, because this pole is in the way, I'm going to step in front of it, and I'm going to get a little bit wider of a shot. That way, when I frame it, it doesn't have that post in the photo. All right, and when you bring your tripod, your camera down, you want to make sure you're looking to see where it's coming down, because last thing you want to do is like slam into a metal post or something. Okay, so again, I took 3 shots, forward facing, left and right, and that's pretty standard for most shoots. So that's usually all I take with a pole, unless there's some specific shots that I want to get. No. So for the back side of the house, typically you'll want to showcase the size of the yard. And the lower the camera is to the ground, the more of the ground that you'll photograph. So you want to shoot those at ground level. So for the exterior front, the other remaining shot would be a front door shot, or if they've got some nice landscaping, you may take an additional landscaping shot. So I typically take enough photos so that people can get a good idea of how the home is laid out and kind of get the same experience as if they were walking through the home. So, you know, when you get to the house, you kind of drive past it, you see the exterior. You get out of your car and, you know, you walk up to the front door. So that's kind of where we're at now. We're taking a picture of the front door to kind of signal to the people, hey, we're at the house, we're going in the front door now. Okay, so as far as exterior shooting goes, we're going to follow the same techniques as we do for interior photos. And I'll go over that inside just because it's so hot out here. Okay.
And you shoot everything in landscape?
So sometimes I will shoot portrait. Photos present better in landscape format online because most of the online portals favor that orientation. Okay. Whoa. So obviously it was a lot brighter outside than it is in here. So we've taken an exterior front door shot. We'll take an interior foyer shot. Just like I said, as we work through the space, we'll just continually take photos in a manner that makes sense, as if you were walking through the space. Okay. So when framing a photo for real estate photography, and I'll let you come up and take a look. I always use a live view because my back is bad. It's hard for me to hunch over, especially in corners. It's really hard to kind of look at your optical viewfinder. So I always frame it where I can see it. So some of the key things for real estate photography are that you want to have these verticals, grid lines, parallel to other verticals in the space. So like I'm looking at this grid line here in this door jamb, and it's perfectly parallel with it. Same thing with this door jamb and that vertical line. So sometimes you'll see people, they'll take their tripod, they'll raise it up, and they'll point the camera downward. And you can see what happens when you do that is these vertical lines skew outward. Okay, just like when we were outside and we pointed upwards, these vertical lines are now converging. In real estate photography, you want to have everything pretty much vertical. So that's kind of the first step. The next thing you want to do when you compose your shot is you want to make sure that all your settings are correct. So whenever I'm photographing property, I never change my ISO and I never change my aperture. The only thing I'm varying is my shutter speed. So, you know, I'll look at a point within the space, and then I'll look and see what my metered reading is. And typically I'll shoot it with it at 0, but from experience, sometimes I'll shoot it just below at -1 stop. Normally I don't shoot it at +1 stop. And the reason I shoot it at -1 stop is because in post you can recover shadows a lot easier than really bright areas. So I prefer to get more of the shadows, more of the highlights. So a faster shutter speed will give me more highlights. If you have a long shutter speed, all that stuff will be blown out and there's no recoverable information. So if I have to err on the side of caution, I'm going to shoot it at a lower metered reading. Okay, so those are kind of the how to. Now we need to talk about the what. The what is how do you frame the shot, or what are you looking at when you frame a shot. So you know each shot is going to be different. For foyer shots, you know you want to have the front door. If you can get this is kind of a tight space, so you're not going to get a ton of things in here. You want to make sure your camera height is at a reasonable level. So you want to make sure your camera height is typically highest midway in the room. So if the room height is 9 feet, the highest you want to have your tripod is like 4.5 feet. Okay. Ideally, you're going to have it somewhere in the 3-foot range. And the reason for that is because you're selling real estate, and a lot of people judge the size of a space based on the floor space. So again, we talked about the tripod being lower, the camera being lower. You get more of the floor as opposed to the ceiling. As well as when it's furnished, more of the interesting things are lower to the ground than at the ceiling. There are times when I will raise a tripod because you need to shoot over furniture or over countertops or bars. So you can raise your tripod for that. Okay, so when you frame the shot, you can either do it at an angle or straight on. Most of my shots are going to be at an angle because it's more visually, the composition is a little more appealing. There are times when you can do head-on shots, but because you were using a wide angle lens, it introduces a lot of wide angle distortion, especially in narrow spaces. So you just need to be cognizant of that when you're taking photos. So I'll go ahead and take this photo, and then we'll frame a shot in the kitchen. So you can see longer shutter speeds because it is darker in here. Okay. All right, so we'll take one looking at the kitchen. So because we do have a countertop here, I'll raise the tripod slightly to see over the countertop. In general, you want to include like this whole hallway here, just because you want to make the space look as large as possible. And as you can see from my framing, all the vertical lines are vertical. So that's a good shot. And like I said, if you're going to shoot a photo at an angle, you want to have it at a good 45 or close to 45 degrees. Shooting something where you're like here, it begs the question, okay, was this person really trying to take a 45, like an angled shot, or were they trying to do a straight on shot and it just didn't work out? Right. So you want to let the people know that, hey, I'm a professional photographer, I know what I'm doing. If I'm taking a photograph that's dead on, it's going to be dead on. If it's an angled shot, it's going to be an angled shot. Because this is like somewhere in between, right. And you're like, well, I'm not sure what they were trying to do there. So, the first thing I said we talk about, we'll frame our shot. And with every photo, what you're trying to do is just basically communicate something. You're trying to communicate this about, the specific space that you're photographing, but you also want to convey information about how that space is oriented with respect to other spaces. So that's why I try to, get the hallway, or if I'm shooting from an angle, the adjacent rooms. Or if you're, in an area where there's a living space and then bedrooms on the other, bedrooms attached, I'll shoot with the doors open so people can see, hey, there's a bedroom there, and they can see how that room is positioned in relative to the living space. Okay, so we have our composition. This is a good composition. I checked my metering, right on there at right as metered. As far as where I'm going to focus, this room, it's a lot of stuff going on everywhere. So you want to focus, just basically midway into the space. And that should allow everything else to be within the space to be within focus. For kitchens, I tend to take more photos of kitchens than I do of other spaces like bedrooms, just because that's something that people really key in on. So for kitchens like this, I'll take anywhere from 3 to 5 photos, and maybe even in living spaces we'll take additional photos. Like this living space is a combination living space of a dining room and a living room. So, we may end up taking about 4 or 5 of this space right here. So this is an instance where we're taking a dead-on shot, or horizontal. So this is where I'm going to, again, want to have my verticals and horizontals both lined up. These are more difficult to frame just because you have an extra thing to consider when framing the shot. But once you get it framed, again, setting your exposure and your focus is just like before. You want to give them enough angle so that they know where the appliances are. Ideally they can see the appliances in one of the photos that you take of the kitchen. So I'll take one more from this corner. So for this shot, I'll lower the camera one tripod leg so I can get it as far back into the corner as possible. So this causes the camera to lean backwards. It gives me just a little bit more in way of the frame. Okay, so slide your head back a little bit more. Okay, so those are all the photos we'll take of the kitchen. Now we'll focus kind of on each of these individual spaces. We'll look at the living room first. So the best way to photograph an empty space like this is to kind of visualize furniture in it and then compose your shot as though there was furniture. The other way to do it is to just shoot from each of the corners. So that would be the simple, easy way to do it. Again, just like every other photo, we're making sure our verticals are vertical. We're at a clear 45-degree shot. We're looking at our metered exposure, and we're right on there. So this is like a pretty deep space. There's nothing in it. So to focus it, you can either like focus it in the middle of the floor. I like to look at this because it gives it a little more at the door, because there's a few more things for the camera to figure out. Okay, I can kind of lock in on these types of things. So I'll kind of take like 3 photos in this room, kind of highlighting just this room, and then it's positioned to the kitchen. I'll take one more from the corner over here to show that, hey, there's a dining area here, and then we'll take 2 of the dining area specifically. So for this one, you guys may want to like go up the stairs because there's nowhere for you to hide. Okay, you can go back down. Okay, so like I said, we'll kind of showcase the dining area. So again, visualizing that there's furniture in the space. It's like if there was a table there, I would kind of center my shot on the chandelier. Okay. And then I'll take one from the opposite corner, looking back this way. Another thing you want to think about when you're taking photos is lights that are behind you, because sometimes you'll cast shadows, or if there's reflective surfaces, your reflection may get caught. So you'll be wanting to kind of look around and be aware of that, because sometimes you may need to move out from behind the camera. Okay, so we got all the photos down here except for the half bath, which we'll take now. So because this is a tight space, I'm not going to shoot it as a landscape photo. I typically shoot powder rooms like this as a portrait shot, just because you get a lot more information. So I'm looking at the right side of my screen. I'm looking at the door jamb. I'm looking at this corner to make sure I got some verticals aligned properly. So once I get that, I'll lock in my tripod, and then I'll adjust my exposure again, and then take a picture looking at that. All right, so that's the bathroom. Okay, so transitioning from floor to floor, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a picture of the actual stairwell. So again, visually signal someone that as they're looking at photos that, hey, we're going to the second floor. So for this one, I'll raise it up just so you can see over the banister a little bit more. And then focus on something, midway within the space. Okay, so that's the entire first floor. And we'll head up to the second floor. When you're moving around the space with your tripod, you want to move your tripod legs in, because otherwise it'll hit the wall and cause marring, so you don't want that. For bedrooms, most bedrooms, you'll take just 2 photos, maybe sometimes only 1, depending on the furniture in the room. But in general, I take 1 from the door and then 1 from the opposite side of the room. And in most cases, that's enough to tell people what's there. So I put it as close to the corner of the jam as possible. As you can see from my photo composition, you can see all three corners, so you capture the entire space. So you can see out the windows. If you want to get a clearer view, you can expose a little lower exposure. Not really great views, so we'll just expose it normally.
Okay.
But if you were like at the beach and you had an ocean view, that's probably something you want to accentuate.
Right.
Okay. So then when you review your photos, as you can see this last photo, it's really blown out. This is not very useful. So I think if I wanted to get a better view outside, which I already have clear views, it's not that big of a deal, I could have exposed it at lower. So, okay, I'm going to take one from this corner. So if you guys want to hang out in the hallway while I do that. Oh, here's a good note. So if I want to get closer to the corner, I'm going to use that same tripod trick where I kind of collapse this leg a little bit to help the camera lean back into the space. And that'll give me a little bit better field of view. Okay, so that's that shot. We'll go ahead and take one of the closet here, just because it's a nice size closet. So sometimes I'll take these closet shots as a portrait, but this is big and wide enough that I can take it as a landscape. Okay. So for the master bathroom, so you can take this shot in one of two ways. You want to showcase the vanity. You also want to showcase the shower. So I could take it from this vantage point, which would be perfectly fine. The camera will show up in the photo. We just remove that in post. But I like taking it from this spot here. That way people can kind of see into the bedroom. And then I'll take a second shot looking at the shower. So I feel like this composition is a little bit more interesting. You actually get a better view of the vanity as well. When you're framing the shot for the shower, a lot of times you'll want to make sure you can see the fixtures if that's possible.
Yeah.
So for this shot, I'm going to set the timer to 10 seconds because it's easy enough to remove a reflection of a camera from a photo, but it's harder to do it of a person and a camera.
Yeah.
So basically compose your shot, set your timer, basically set your exposure, set your focus, take the picture. And then we're actually going to get out of the doorway because it's reflecting through the door. Okay. All right, so that's the master bedroom. We'll go and do the secondary bedrooms.
You don't usually include photos of like the toilets.
No, people pretty much assume there's a toilet.
Yeah.
I mean, I have done it in some buildings, but they had a bidet and it was like really elaborate. Yeah, if it's just a toilet, don't worry about it. Okay, so again, for the bedrooms, we're just gonna take 2 shots.
Will you take the same exact photo of this bedroom and this other bedroom, since they have the same layout?
Yes, because I mean, they're different rooms.
Mm-hmm.
There's different views out of the rooms, so people can see that they're different. And honestly, I take the photos that I know how to take, and then it's up to the agent to post whatever they want to post.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that they have if they use it, great. If they don't, that's great too.
Mm-hmm.
But last thing I want is them to not have the photo available to use because I didn't take the picture. So after I do a secondary bedroom, I'll take a photo of a bathroom just to kind of break up the monotony, because especially in these rooms where there's no furniture, it might get confusing, like how many bedrooms was that? So by putting another type of room in the mix, it kind of breaks that up a little bit. So again, we're just going to frame the shots with the camera kind of as tight as in the corners we can. And I'll kind of show you how I frame it up. So again, we're looking at our verticals. I'm looking at this door jamb here on the right, and then the mirror, as well as the tub, and any other vertical lines. Okay, you don't want to include too much of this door jamb, really as little as possible. So that's how I would frame that shot. And then again, we'll just check our exposure, and our exposure is good. So we'll just focus it and take the picture. And again, I step back from the camera because I don't want any shadows going in there or any reflections. Like sometimes fixtures are chrome and they'll see your reflection in that. Most people wouldn't notice it, but I do, so. Okay, so we'll go ahead and shoot the laundry. Again, it's another smaller space, so I'll shoot it with a vertical orientation.
Can you leave that box there?
No, I'll probably pull that down.
Can you pull it down?
Okay. So if it's easy enough to move and it'll make a big difference in the photo, go ahead and move it. And every situation is different. If that box was full of bricks, I'd be like, probably not going to move that. But it's an empty box, so it makes sense. Okay, and you can see from a vertical orientation, I can pull the camera out behind the threshold because it's not so wide. And that gives you, again, more floor space in the final photo than you would otherwise. Okay, so then we'll just photograph this last bedroom here.
What would you say is a more common type of job that you do, like unfurnished houses like this, or more like?
No, usually they're furnished. Someone's living in them. Yeah. They're a little more interesting. Like empty rooms like this are kind of a boring thing to photograph, but they're really easy. They go really quick, and you get paid per the job, not the complexity. So I definitely don't mind shooting them. Yeah, there's a lot less to focus on. You don't have to look for clutter. You don't have to contend with dogs or people. So, you can get in, get the key, and then just start photographing. So, okay, we'll go ahead and do the upstairs. I'm not going to do one of the stairwell because it's enclosed. So we're just going to go up the stairs and start photographing the third floor. Okay, so for this floor, we're really going to take just 2 photos, one from this corner, and one from that corner, and that's going to cover this entire area, and we'll take one in the bathroom. So, I'm just doing exactly the same thing with every single shot. It's a very repetitive thing. The only thing you really need to think about is how are you going to frame the shot. And a lot of times it's kind of, you're doing the same framing for everything, especially bedrooms or bathrooms like this. Living spaces is a little more challenging, but nothing that you can't learn for sure. Right. So I'll give you some guidelines and you can kind of work off the guidelines. Okay, so for this bathroom, this is a little bit of a weird bathroom because the door is between the shower and the faucet. So it's not really a good way to get a photo like this. So what I ended up doing in this bathroom is going into the bathroom and setting the tripod up in the corner and then just setting my timer for 10 seconds. Because again, I'll be reflected in the bathroom and the shower and I don't want to be in it. So, And like we said before, it's not really that important for you to take photos of toilets. So the fact that I'm not getting the toilet in the photo is not that big of a deal. Okay. Oh, what's seeing me? No, I should be okay. Okay. All right, so those are all the interior photos that we would take for this property. Last thing we would need to do is just do the exterior. I'm going to leave these lights on because I'm actually coming back this evening to do some twilight photos. So we're just going to leave them on.
How do you go about finding these jobs?
So that's the hard part, right?
Right.
So we've been in business coming up on 5 years now. And I'll be honest with you, the first 2 years I was running it part-time with not a lot of activity, just because it's hard to have a full-time job and try to do this on the side.
Yeah.
I can only have limited time for marketing. You have an advantage because your dad's in the business, so he can find work for you. But like jobs where I'm working for builders like Pulte, it just takes a lot of time to establish those relationships. Like I remember my first time I keyed in on builders because I know they've got a lot of inventory, and it took me like 3 years to finally get in here. So, but I mean, it's a good opportunity once you get in there. And then as you build relationships, like I'll go into a lot of model homes and ask if I can photograph it or show them my work. I had one agent, I was doing a meeting, and I was doing a demo at a meeting, and she was a builder or a sales agent at one of the builders, and for D.R. Horton, and she got me to do a couple of shoots for their company. And she's actually moved from a couple of different companies, but she always calls me and says, "Hey, can you do this work?" And then they end up being happy with it, the builder. So then other people in the company contract me for work. So, but in general, you can do marketing campaigns. You can do cold calling. I've gotten a couple of different clients from cold calling. So I'll look on Zillow and I'll see, who's either using a professional photographer or who isn't. And I'll contact them and say, "Hey, would you be willing to give me a shot on your photos?" Sometimes I'll do a free offer where, "Hey, I won't charge you anything. Just give me a shot."
And those people that you're contacting are real estate agents or?
Yeah, agents. Builders, you can't contact like the sales rep typically. You kind of have to jump through the corporate hoops. Come on through. But there's a ton of agents. So even if you only focused on agents, you should be able to get a good amount of work. There are like 5,800 agents in the Charleston area. Not all of them list property, but there's only like 30 real estate photographers at most.
Right.
So
How would I start since I don't have a portfolio from doing this?
so if you wanted to start on your own, what I did was, like I said, went into builder properties because they're usually, the model homes are staged.
Like when they have open houses?
No, you don't want to do it when people are around. You'll do it middle of the day, when the agent's just sitting there doing nothing. And you just like, let them know your situation. "Hey, I'm looking to get into the real estate photography business. I'd like to build my portfolio. Would you mind if I photographed your model home? I'd be happy to share the photos with you, once I'm done." And more often than not, they're happy to let you shoot it.
Where do you find those kinds of properties? Just on other websites and just typing in somewhere?
Yeah, any new home community.
Okay.
You can just go to Lennar and they've got them all posted on their site. And you just visit each one. So are you doing other types of photography at the moment?
More just like as a hobby,
As what?
more just as a hobby, just walking around downtown and
Okay.
taking photos that I think are interesting, and taking photos of my
friends, taking photos of myself.
But you're trying to figure out how you can
Make
make money of it, yeah.
Because I don't want to get into weddings.
So I'll say wedding photography is very challenging. It takes a significant amount of effort to get in there because it's very competitive here in the Charleston area. It's being the #1 wedding destination in the world, apparently. Also, you need a lot more equipment to get into wedding photography. It's good that you have a full frame camera to start with, but you'll need a myriad of different lenses, both prime and zoom, as well as lighting. And this other challenges that go, you probably need a second shooter.
Do you know
Post process is more difficult.
Kim Graham photo?
No.
She doesn't do weddings. She just takes kind of like lifestyle
Yeah.
photos and gets them into magazines. But I'm not really sure how she does.
The best place to ask is just the person you talked with. I think we're done with the photo shoots then. Do you have any more questions about real estate photography in general or specifics?
Not really. That was
Okay, so for a property like this, once you get proficient, it's a 20-minute shoot, start to finish. I think we took probably about 45 minutes to do it, but once you get proficient, you can knock something out like this in about 20 minutes. So they go quick, it's not like a wedding shoot where you're there for 8 hours and then in post for another 16.
right.
So, and it's very low stress. So, okay, any other questions?
No.
Nope. Okay. Let's see.
Thank you so much.
No problem.